All right. Good afternoon. We hope you all had a very good lunch and that an opportunity to sit and network or just to have some conversation with the folks at your table and other folks too. Thank you all for being a good sport with our purple picture. We certainly appreciate that. And so I think that's going to be, one of the highlights of the day. So it is my pleasure to again kick off this afternoon's sessions, the panels that we're going to have. But first, I really want to introduce to you someone who really needs no introduction, someone who has been an outstanding and esteemed professional in the field of addiction for us here in Florida. He comes to us with a long history of serving, of medical education and research. Just has been involved in multiple practices, affiliated with FSU College of Medicine. A man who really needs no introduction, and who we are so grateful and so thankful that he's here and that he's a part of us here in Florida in our efforts. Dr. Mark Stavros. But before he comes up to work his magic, I have to be the one with all of the nuts and bolts and all the boring stuff. So if you would like continuing education for today, you'll have to sign out at the end of the day at the front table. Everyone signed in, I hope, but sign out to get CEs. If you traveled in today and parked in the garage, you will not have to pay for parking. The gates will be open at the end of the day, and you will be able to leave without having to pay. The refreshments are out here, the restrooms are in the back, and I think that's all that I had to say. So, Dr. Stavros, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. I know I'm mic'd up. If you want me to go to this mic or just walk around? Can I walk around? Woo! All right, here we go. Now y'all are in trouble. All right, so this part of the session really is meant to be very interactive. So we want questions from everybody. Who's seen Donahue before? All right, don't say yes if you don't want to mention your age there. But anyway, so Diana is going to be our Donahue today. She's going to be going to y'all if you have questions, and please ask these esteemed colleagues here questions, and so we can have an interactive discussion about that as well. Mark Stavros, I'm board certified in addiction medicine. I work as an emergency physician. I've worn a couple hats in my life and continue to do so. It's exciting to be here as well. I do want to ask everybody to just kind of introduce themselves so we know who you are exactly. So go ahead.
All right. Well, I always start quiet because I will probably get louder so the guy in the back can make sure I don't scream in your guys' ears. But my name is Taylor South. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I work with Tri-County Human Services, which is mainly based in the Polk, Highlands, and Hardy counties. I'm one of our outpatient program coordinators. I was specifically brought on when I was hired at Tri-County to work with the adolescent and youth population that we have specifically in Polk County. And so I've spent probably a vast majority of my career there. Been licensed about 4.5 years now, practicing as a clinician with registered intern in my master's program. So I've been practicing for pretty close to 9.5, 10 years. So super excited to be here and talk with you guys today.
Hi, I'm Varsha Ilana. I'm an LCSW. I'm the Director of Outpatient Services over at Phoenix House in Hillsborough County. I oversee our adult and adolescent programming. Thank you for having me today.
So what we're going to start with, this first session is called Engaging Youth in Treatment. So any questions that you would have for our panel about how do we engage patients in treatment, especially our youth, right? How do we engage our youth in treatment? So anybody have any first initial questions at all? Don't hesitate to raise your hand. If not, I will get the party started. All right, I don't see any hands, so here we go. You ready? I've got a couple of cheater questions here, so that should help a little bit. So young people often see substance use as recreational or a temporary patch to deal with something in their lives. How can we help them recognize dependency and addiction?
So for me, I would say my general, you will probably hear me say this multiple times throughout this, my general rule of thumb with adolescents is we understand generally that they see themselves as the center of the world, and we pretty much normally we go, yep, that makes about sense. So when I hear that question of how do we help them understand something, we apply it to them in what they're currently doing. So if we want them to understand this theory or this idea of addiction as a disease and how it's impacting them, I almost always start with, how is it currently impacting your life, and where do we see those impacts on you currently? You have been brought here or are here for a reason. What is that reason that has led to you coming here? They have a very hard time generally understanding, oh, well, in 10 years, this might be the cause and effect. Oh, well, with continued use, this might be an effect that this has on you, or it might have this, future-oriented discussion, which we tend to do as clinicians. We want to avoid those future-oriented items, but if we can make it something that's more current for them today, they tend to be far more interested in that benefit to them that they will see in the next week, month, or year, probably at the most.
Any other questions out there? All right. Thank you.
Be you or be youth that their parents are also struggling with addiction, so it's something that they've perhaps grown up with in their own home environment.
So I think it goes back to, I'm very simple, basic girl, and I'm going to say it goes back to simple discussion and being open. It starts at home, right? So engaging more in conversation. It goes to normalizing the situation, right? In schools, at home, I think we're looking at peer support, so NAAA, but we also have treatment programs, right? So IOP, SOP, and that's normalizing the situation. I hope I answered your question.
I'll throw out one more thing, if I might, on that. I, with a lot of our youth and teens, have said, is exactly the situation your parents are in or the family member that is continuing to use substances, is that where you want to be and see yourself? I will use a previous client of mine where my internship supervisor at that point, my qualified supervisor at that point, I was having a hard time with a similar client who's pretty much everybody in their life was like, weed's not an issue. Don't worry about it. Tell this Taylor guy what he wants to hear. Move on with your life, which I presume a lot of you in the room are smiling because you're like, yep, heard of that one, been there, done that. And my registered intern supervisor had mentioned, he goes, ask if he wants to live in a different community than one he currently lives. At that point, that youth lived in a heavy gang-infested area. Literally, people were being attacked on a daily basis due to their associations and just who they were. This specific individual had probably been I want to say this was like October, so very early part of the school year. This individual had been in 10-plus fights, was pretty much getting in fights every day. And I would ask him, like, why are you getting in fights every day? And they're like, they called my mom stupid. And I'm like, okay, like I get the concept here. And I was like, where did you learn that punching someone in the face is the way to deal with that? And he goes, well, my dad's in prison for killing someone because they made fun of him. I'm like, well, that makes sense. Is that your goal here too? And I said it specifically that. I said, is that your goal here? And he goes, well, of course not. I said, because that's where this is leading. You have already been arrested multiple times for these fights. And my supervisor had mentioned, why don't you consider like, hey, would you want to live in this area? And the youth literally goes, that's not possible. And I went, okay, fair. Why isn't it possible? And he kind of stopped for a minute because he realized that it is technically possible. But for him and everybody he knew around him, they had told him that wasn't an option. And so I said, you want to know one of the things I think makes it not an option? Is in my neighborhood, if I punch my neighbor, they are not going to just allow that, and it's not rule of the land kind of concept. They're going to call the police. I'm going to get arrested, and I'm going to have fairly significant consequences to that. Whereas in your neighborhood, you punch your neighbor, they probably aren't calling the police because the police aren't generally revered in that area. And so that's just going to keep on going. They're probably going to punch you in the face tomorrow. Like, that's the rule of the land. And so I asked if he would want to live in a different community than the way he currently lives. He goes, Taylor, it's not even an option. And I was like, well, it would be if some of these behaviors were different. So I would consider that you try these different behaviors, at least give me a shot. That student ended up finishing in the year, which no one had any intention of him finishing the year. And a lot of it was due to behavior change. So I found, going back to the last question, where how did I get him to understand that? I met him where he was at, and I found out what did you want? What do you want? Cool. Do you think this behavior is going to get you to that point? And we all know 2 + 2 is never 9.
All right. Any other questions out there?
Did you have any further comment on that? All right.
All right. I'm going to my cheat sheet. Nobody's going to ask. I might just call on people. That'll be more fun. So how can we motivate, the youth to change when it may not be comfortable for them to change?
Okay. Varsha, you want to go ahead with that?
So I think Taylor and Dr. Solomon, like she was discussing this morning, is meeting them where they're at, right? No treatment is cookie cutter. It's all individualized, tailored to that client. And when we're meeting the client where they're at, that means, what do they need? What do they need to motivate them? And, it goes back to, they need peer support. They need to normalize their situation. And I think when they see other clients in similar situation, and it pushes them to, okay, I can move forward. One thing we do at Phoenix House is we applaud them when they do great. So something simple. They're a week clean. Good job, you're doing great. And when their peers see that, they're like, I can do that as well.
I'll throw out there really quickly, again, I said I'd say the same thing because I believe that is one of the keys, which is find what will benefit them. One of my mentors through my degree program said, people will remain the same until the pain of change is less than the pain of remaining the same. So there is pain in every change we ever make. I literally started running this morning, and that was painful, but I decided it was something that was important for me to start doing, and I had to decide that the pain of getting up and going running this morning was less than the pain of remaining that way. So I think it's finding when have they reached that point where the pain of remaining the same, of continuing to use substances, is worse than the pain of the change we may be asking them to do.
Do we have any questions? Or any thoughts on this?
Is it my time to call on people?
Yeah.
I'll pick. Yeah, I got to just say a couple comments. So I'm an ER doctor, and I see kids all the time come in the ER for different psychiatric reasons. Sometimes it's substance use. Oftentimes it's both, right? That's what we see. So, and it's frustrating to me because there just doesn't seem to be enough resources. Like if you have a kid that's Baker acted and they come to my ER, they're going to be spending not hours, days in the ER before they find some place that's going to take care of them. And oftentimes there's substance use in that as well, because how are they dealing with their psychiatric issues? They're using substances. Where did they learn that? From home, most likely. So how do we get agencies or the state or insurances to kind of help us, meet those needs that those kids need? I mean, they obviously there's just not enough help to go around. There's not enough funding for that. Any thoughts or ideas of how we can improve that here in our state? And that could be for anybody. Anybody have any great ideas? That'd be great. Break the silos.
It looks at that where does that funding need to go? And this is how much we have for substance abuse. We can't combine the two. Oh, don't give me that. Yeah, we need to break that silo that we have of the funding. So make it to where we're looking at the needs of that person and we meet those needs. We don't look at, we have to follow certain standards, or, which I know we need to have those, 65E14 and D30. Absolutely need to have those, but the funding is so restricted in regards to some things we can't think outside the box, which is what we need to do, not be inside the box, because our world is changing way too much, especially for our kids.
Yeah, exactly.
If there's one thing I could add to that, thank you so much for that, because I think within the field of behavioral health, we hear the idea of silos like all the time. There's someone who I think wants to answer a question in the back too. But I think, when we talk about silos all the time, then my next question oftentimes is, okay, cool, how do we do that? I don't control the funding, as great as that sounds like it would potentially be. And the people in the room who do are like, not so much fun actually. But I think when we talk about silos, I'm like, okay, cool. As a clinician, as a program coordinator, how can I do that? How can I start to break the silos? And one of the things I've encouraged from my staff is when you have a client who needs services that maybe you're not as confident in or as trained in, or maybe it's just a topic area that you don't have a lot of knowledge base in, I believe it's an expectation of us to develop that knowledge base, youth being one of them. I believe we probably all in the room have worked with clinicians like, oh, I don't work with kids, I don't work with youth, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, challenge accepted. I'm going to help you develop that skill because we don't have the resources currently, and the only way for us to get those resources is to have more clinicians, to have more resources available. And so that's one of the things for me. Sports is a really big area. I do sports psychology, I do coaching development, I do emotion coaching, which is quote unquote different than therapy, but I do it that way because a lot of especially youth male clients feel much more comfortable with emotion coaching. They know exactly what coaching is. A lot of them play sports. They know exactly what it is when I say emotion coaching. They go, coaching about my emotions. Cool. I can do that. I see a coach. I have my football coach, my basketball coach, my tennis coach, my cross country coach, whoever, every single day of the week. I know exactly what I can expect from you then, and that's a much more approachable environment for them, and it allows me to be the one going between silos like the school. If I can approach and see them in the school, it allows me to break some of those silos too. So I encourage my staff to do that as well.
If I can add, to take it a step back before they get to the emergency room. So I know in Alachua County that at Meridian, they have a crisis prevention team, of which they they get activated and they go into the home when there's an occurrence of being called or a well check that's needed to prevent that Baker Act and see if they can get that child somewhere before going to the emergency room.
Great.
Is there a question back here?
Somebody back here?
Okay.
I was going to race you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Martine Sonatas. I'm a board-certified psychiatric mental health and family nurse practitioner. I'm president of Pathways to Wellness Foundation. We're an outpatient clinic, and we do take care of clients with substance abuse. And the question I heard the doctor ask is, how do we get resources for our children? It's in legislation. If we get the people that understand what our issues are and we get them in the right positions, then we can have funding from the federal, from the state to fund these programs. We also need to understand how the children think, media, social media, infiltrate the media to teach them why it's important not to use drugs, why it's important not to be influenced by your peers to make poor decisions. I believe those are very important because it's a systems approach. It's not just a one cookie cutter thing. It takes a village, like they say, to treat. It's going to have to be a systems approach, and I believe legislation is one of the key areas that we need to address.
Great point.
Any other questions right now? It's a great conversation. Let's keep it up.
So she brought up something important, and I know it's kind of a shock, but our kids actually are into social media. You ever heard of that? So kind of a big deal, obviously, right? That's how we reach our youth, is through social media, because that's what they're using all the time. So any thoughts? What is the best way to approach that through technology to reach our youth? Any ideas on that?
So I think social media is it's a double-edged sword, right? So it's good because, we connect, reconnect, we network, we do all these great things. But when we use social media like Instagram, Facebook, all of these other great apps, it's putting a facade, right? And our youth get caught up in this facade, and then they want to be part of the facade, and it's a never-ending factor, right? So one thing that like my team does is that we have an ongoing conversation with our youth about using social media in a healthy way, right? And is social media a trigger? So we have that conversation. I think conversation is so important because it goes back to our youth they have open minds, but there's still a heavy stigma. So having that conversation, but also introducing healthier apps like Headway or My3, where they can create a safety plan. And I think it goes back to, we have to ask them, behind this picture, what is actually happening? Like, what is truly happening? Do we know? And just having tough conversation.
So real quick, what are those apps you just talked about? Headway, My3, or?
So My3, it helps create like a safety plan. If a client is in crisis, they can use that kind of as a reminder instead of like the physical paper. Headway is a meditation app that we actually use in our groups, specifically in our adolescent groups, and they will take 5 minutes because our groups are after class. It takes 5 minutes, meditate, help them be present, and we move on with our activity. So that's what those few apps are. But there's so much more. But we have to ask the question, what is behind the picture? And it does open great dialogue, I will say that.
Taylor, you have anything on that?
Yeah, for me, I work with I'm part owner, but I work with an apparel company. I know I look like the most fashionable person ever, so I'm sure you all knew that already. But I work with this apparel company to make sure that we are putting out apparel that could be supportive of mental health needs. We work heavily within the sports industry, so heavily within some professional athletes that we sponsor, who will utilize things like a men's mental health jersey focus. We have a professional MLB player who uses one of our gloves, and he has the men's mental health ribbon on the thumb of his glove, and he's a pitcher. So for anybody who watch baseball, it zooms in on his glove very, 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 very often, and I will post it on my social media very, 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 very often for that purpose, because he is someone that a lot of individuals, specifically youth on social media, will see. And how many of us have seen a symbol and we're like, what is that symbol? We'll look up, what is the symbol that looks like this? And then we will start to investigate that and find out what that is. There's an individual out of Polk County who runs a company called Dreamer Outfits. And he has a lot of very, very high profile social media football players. And they wear his Dreamer Outfit shorts. And it says Dreamer, 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 like graffitied style all over the outfit. And he talks a lot about how his mental health led to him starting this company where he has identified to be a dreamer and to go for better things other than what's oftentimes proposed in social media. So I'm a really big advocate of using these, some considered marketing platforms, through social media to connect our youth and students to things they are already wanting to look at. They are already wanting to watch professional athletes and watch these influencers. So if the influencers are wearing items that support what we want them also, because we know it's healthy for them to be more invested in that, then we can have that conversation and we don't have to start it, right? We don't have to start it in our office. They see it and they come to us going, have you ever seen this? And they start the conversation then about it.
That's awesome.
Have any questions?
How about everybody else out there? How have you used social media to reach the youth, or what kind of programs do you have, or apps, or suggestions that you might have?
Diana, I think we had someone up here.
Oh.
Wait, it was not about.
Okay, we'll go in another direction.
Well, in that case, we'll go to that topic, whatever it is.
My question is first, I'm Jenny LaRue. I identify as being in long-term recovery as well. I started using when I was a teenager. I'm an old broad now. But what I know works is peer support, certified peer support or peer-to-peer work. And so our state certifies peers in youth, but you get an age out as part of the process. So how do we, as a state, include youth so that they are learning how to be peers to help, because I will respond much more to someone of my age group than I will try to someone of your age group. Like, you don't know about a rotary phone and I know about a rotary phone, okay?
Hey, you're right, but
But I'm just saying there's lived experience that I have that you don't have, and vice versa. And so how do we get peer support into our youth without having somebody like my age try to talk to somebody in their teens versus somebody in their 20s or even late teens talking to somebody? And I don't think there's enough of that in this state.
looks like we're going to answer right behind her.
Hi, Jenny. How are you? One answer to your question is through the Teen Mental Health First Aid Program. Everybody, and I was going to mention that I have not heard anybody say mental health first aid yet in this room. Youth Mental Health First Aid is the program that teaches adults who work with youth on how to respond for mental health. Teen Mental Health First Aid is teaching teens how to be that support for other teens. In Nassau County, where I am at Starting Point Behavioral Health Care, this is our 4th year of providing teen mental health first aid for every 10th grader in the public school system. So as of right now, every student, every grade at this point now, because we did 10th graders last year, so we're doing it, so the 10th, 11th, 12th graders, and then we also have another graduating class who have all been trained in teen mental health first aid. There's also another program out there with the Hope Coaches. I don't know if any of the school districts in Florida are doing that, but it started in Utah, I believe, with the Hope Coach program, which is another teen peer mentor program. And there's many out there. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of funding for teen mental health first aid because there is not prevention on the mental health side through the block grant. It's only substance use. And at the national level, the National Council is advocating to get preventative services approved through the block grant and do a set aside on mental health as one exists for substance use to continue to fund the mental health first aid program.
Two more. You got two more over there.
Other question. Oh, couple questions.
Kind of comment, or I don't have a question. What this lady said over here, I'm a certified peer specialist up in St. Johns County, and I've been invited multiple times to go to Epic Behavioral Health to speak to the youth there. They have like a youth program with troubled kids that have been prone for like pot, things like that inside school, right? They'll go into this program. And I think one of the most powerful things that you can do with youth, and I do with adults, my peer as a certified specialist, but I think with kids, or even with adults too, I think the most powerful thing is your testimony. I think a lot of people, I don't know if they value that enough, but I think when you share your testimony as something that's powerful enough, someone that speaks to someone and they can resonate with that, I think that's amazing. I think the problem with social media these days, like I personally, I'm 36 and I don't even do social media. I don't know, I don't really care for it, but that's just my opinion. But I think society and the fact where I'm in long-term recovery, where I got over was where my identity was in everything else, right? I was holding on to a lot of offenses, a lot of anger, resentment in my heart towards certain people and things. And I think, personally, I think it's about me speaking to fathers, speaking to men, that these young girls, I have 2 daughters, that these young men look up to, right? That they don't have those kind of good examples of their household. I think the social media does a very poor job of portraying what a man truly is. I think a man is not defined by how much he can carry, but how much he can let go. And I think vulnerability breeds true authenticity. I think once you get real men actually speaking what a real man is, not what this stuff in social media says, that people are listening to all these celebrities, all this junk going on out there, I think that's very powerful. So sharing that testimony, I'm really interested in go inside the jails soon too and talk to some men about what I believe a man is not defined by your status, your wealth, or your title, your current position, or whatever that may be, but more by love and compassion and how much you can let go and be vulnerable with someone to get you through those deep-seated issues and maybe some that happened, those traumas in your past, and be able to let go of those things and forgive someone else, and not only that, but forgive yourself.
I appreciate you sharing that, man. Super helpful. I do a lot of that too. I love that.
Hi there. Thank you for talking about youth mental health first aid, and I do want to connect with you later on the teen mental health. I'm the youth mental health coordinator in Brevard County. What I was going to talk about was we have a program called Sources of Strength, which is a peer-to-peer. It's really focused on suicide prevention, but we try to wrap everything into that. Just being positive role models for each other, having that peer that's your age and not somebody, I mean, even our young teachers who are in their 20s, they're so old compared to the kids that are sitting in middle schools. But Sources of Strength is an amazing program. Brevard County Elementary School goes up to 6th grade, so we're moving it into our 6th grades because it's really middle school focused. Our 6th grade is middle school, just it's in the wrong building. I didn't say that out loud. But Sources of Strength and the Youth Mental Health First Aid, absolutely, 100% are amazing programs.
Thank you so much.
One thing I'll throw out that I think continues with it is in our outpatient, I have specific people running my teen groups, and I tell people generally, so our groups are maxed at 15, right? Let's say a group is full. Generally, you'll have 5 that are quote unquote on their way out, right? They're finishing up, they've picked up the material, they're doing well. You'll have 5 that are somewhere in the middle. They're starting to get it. They're in that working phase for the clinicians in the room. We would have that. And then we have 5 who are like oblivious and don't want to be there. And so I encourage my clinicians, utilize that 5 who are quote unquote on their way out. They may not be certified youth peers and those types of things, but they've been there. We've done treatment plan updates and said progress, they're progressing, they have this information. For me, at that point as a clinician, the whole point of a group is that the group runs itself and has that conversation themselves. I will always remember I had an adolescent in my group who was very, very parenticized. He was the parent of his household, which is a whole different thing. But for that, he was very mature, but he was just their same physical stature and statute, and status. And so I utilized him in those last couple of weeks, and I said, hey, I'm going to task you to show and have this conversation with some other group members during the group. You're not forced. You're not discharged successfully if you do and not if you don't. I'm just telling you, I've seen your face when they say off-the-wall stuff, and I want you to verbalize that if you could. And so he had, I think, like 4 or 5 weeks left. And those last 4 or 5 weeks, he did that at least 3 to 5 times. And the other student's like, well, but it's different. And he goes, it's not different. And he can say that because he's a peer, right? He goes to the same school as these kids. And I think that made a big difference. And so I encourage that for our adolescent kids who are finishing that group, that they do that themselves. And I encourage my clinicians to encourage that. So I think when we do that more often in a smaller setting, we do what you were talking about, sir, we allow the testimony, the sharing between people in a small setting, which makes it more comfortable to happen outside of that setting. I've had that same youth come back into my office 3 or 4 times and be like, hey, I got a kid who needs your help. And he will like walk them in the door and drive them to the office. So he's essentially made himself up here without doing that. And I've talked with him about that process too.
You mentioned outpatient, and I was curious to know more, too, about Phoenix House. I'm Carolina Robles. I'm a senior attorney with Children's Legal Services in 13th Circuit in Hillsborough. I'm more familiar with parent residential, but I was curious to know more about the youth resources and opportunities with Phoenix House. Is it outpatient? Is it inpatient? And how long typically is a program?
So it is outpatient. So since you're in Hillsborough, where we have a location in Brandon, we do have a location in Tampa, Rome Avenue. And so we're talking about intensive outpatient programming, and we have standard outpatient programming. But it goes back to treatments, not cookie cutter. So it really depends on that client. And it's all in person.
Okay, we're just about, time is up, but I really hope that you all gained some important information during this. So we'll go ahead, and our next panel is working with adolescents with stimulant use disorder. And I want to thank you both.
That was wonderful.
Thank you both very much. So Varsha's going to stay. And we also have Dustin Perry with Lakeview Center filling in for Dr. L, who unfortunately plane got canceled, my understanding. So And after this panel, we will have a 10-minute break to give you all time. But thank you for your questions. Been very interactive, and that's the whole reason we're having these panels today. So, Dr. Stavros?
So, Varsha, we already know you, so that's great. Thanks for introducing yourself earlier. Dustin, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, good afternoon. I am Dustin Perry. I'm the Director of Residential Services at Lakeview Center. We provide everything from early infant mental health, outpatient counseling, through residential treatment, including SIP between Escambia, Santa Rosa, Okaloosa, and Walton counties in Northwest Florida. A licensed social worker as well.
And if none of you know where that is, that's LA, Lower Alabama. So, all right. So, yeah, thank you. So this session is working with adolescents with stimulant use disorder. All right. Any questions, or do I need to go to my cheat sheet? Anybody have any pressing questions about working with our youth with stimulant use disorder?
Yep, got one. All red.
I was curious to know, with the youth that have been diagnosed with stimulant use disorder, are they also youth that maybe they're neurodivergent and are prescribed stimulants, but perhaps abuse them, or not to?
I apologize. Will you repeat the question for us?
Do the youth that have been diagnosed with stimulant use disorder, are some of them actually prescribed stimulants, but they may abuse them? Or is it typically a youth that is not prescribed, but they're using it and abusing that substance, a stimulant?
It can go, I believe it can go both ways. I mean, they are prescribed medication, but then they, start to abuse it. And then we have the stimulant use disorder, or we have clients that maybe they buy it off the street, or they get it from a friend, they get it from mom's, medication cabinet, and they start abusing it.
I will tell you, one of the things that I see is, and so I work with the medical school, and I've had cohorts of students coming in that used stimulants a lot. I mean, they use it a lot, and some are just using it to kind of get an edge, right? If I'm using a stimulant, that's going to be my little study edge. I can stay up a little bit longer. I can focus a little bit better. I'm going to beat that other person out because I'm trying to get to this point, and it's pretty competitive. And so some patients end up getting they move on to the addiction properties of that as well. What are some of the strategies that schools and parents and healthcare providers implement to educate those students about stimulant use disorder?
I think it's I feel like I'm a broken record. I think it goes back to, we have, back in my day, we had a DARE program, and I think it's important that we have evidence-based programs like that in schools. We have, I'm not a doctor, but medication management and compliance, reminders of, taking medication as prescribed, and just that reminder that when you start to take it just because, or to take the edge off, then now we're stepping into something else.
I think there's the education component. There's just things that we don't know. I don't know a lot of things, and my kids certainly know even less. And I think that the more that we can educate, the more likely it is that we'll see some positive outcomes. When it comes to substance use, we always talk about the negative effects, right? It's always, we look at junkies under the bridge, right? And then we look at the people that are stealing and robbing. And we don't talk necessarily about some of the good things that happen when you use drugs. And I know that's kind of a hard thing to hear sometimes, but that first time that you have a drink, it's kind of relaxing, right? You go out on happy hour on Friday evening, and it's not a big deal. And that's the piece that we don't talk to the kids about. We talk to the kids that if you drink 6 and 8 beers, you're going to get hungover, and you're going to crash your car, and you're going to get your girlfriend pregnant, and all the negative, the doom and gloom of it all. But we don't have that conversation of, if you smoke marijuana with your friends, here's the things that you need to be prepared for. And here's some of the long-term effects that happen. So we got to talk about some of that good stuff that comes with drug use so that we can be prepared to talk about the bad things. Because I know that when I was a teenager, if you told me that drinking was going to kill me, I drank. I didn't die. It felt really, really good. So I drank the next weekend with my friends, and my parents, they didn't know anything. The teachers, they didn't know anything, right? So I got further and further alienated from them. So if we can educate them on, here's some things to be prepared for. Dr. Solomon addressed earlier that drinking sometimes gives you that boost of confidence, so you'll go out and drive. So why don't we tell the kids, hey, look, if you're going to go out and drink, be prepared. Here's the reason that you're going to feel like you can drive, and here's the risk that happens. So lead up to it by sharing, not that drugs are good, that's not the messaging that I'm sending here, but messaging of here's the consequences of continued use, and here's the reality of the situation.
I beat you.
I was just going to say one of the things, conversations that I do a lot of the time is I will say, is it worth the risks? And that doesn't mean there are not benefits. It means you have to decide if that is going to get you closer to your goals or not. And I have had dozens and dozens and dozens of teens who go, no one has ever acknowledged that drinking is fun. No one has ever acknowledged that me and my buddies sitting together getting high on marijuana is actually pretty enjoyable. And when we do that, not only are we, in my opinion, being unethical and not addressing that it's there, but we make ourselves invalid. If I go to my doctor goes, no, there's no benefits at all. I'm going to look at him and go, you're lying. Like, there are. People take this medication for a reason. People use it in school. People do it for this reason. So I think when we do that, like you're saying, you alienate, you actually invalidate every other word you say after that, because they go, you're just wrong. If I drink, and my buddy's been drinking for a decade now, he's fine. So you are lying. Therefore, everything else you say falls into that same category. You're a repeating voice that's not accurate. Good.
Yeah, and I just wanted to echo that, and thank you for bringing that point up, because I think there's still a lot of folks who believe in scare tactics and, oh my God, you're going to die. Teenagers tend to be very black and white, right? If you say something and they can prove you wrong with one example, that means you are wrong on everything that comes out of your mouth from that point forward. So we have to acknowledge the fact that, yeah, you're going to feel good. That's why we talk a lot about trauma and all that, and mental illness and co-occurring, and all that is true. But there is still a subgroup of teenagers who just use because they're trying things out and it's fun. And when we discount that and pretend like, that's not true, we become liars, like you said. And so it's really important to be realistic and to be truthful and to provide the education and the counseling on, yeah, that's true, but let me tell you what can happen, right? Doesn't have to. Not everybody who drinks dies. Not everybody who does drugs dies. That's just not true. So be real and be honest. So that's all.
Great point. Diana, right here.
Thank you. So I have a couple things, but I'm going to try to stay focused. So you guys bring up a great point, and I'd like to pull from that something that you're highlighting. You may not even realize that you're highlighting. The youth of today desire explanation. A lot of us, your parent would just say, well, this is what it is because I said so. And that was it for us. We couldn't ask questions, but they ask so many questions. And so we would benefit more from actually explaining to them, not at first, it might feel great. The research says bodily function is going to decrease at this point. Getting a little scientific, if they're ready for that type of thing, but explaining a bit more, like you all have said. At first, yes, it does feel good, but this is what it does to your body. A thing that you highlighted quickly, you touched on it just briefly. Yeah, you had a drink and you're like, I didn't die, cool. But then the next weekend you were doing it again and you didn't tell your parents. So I can't say what your relationship was with your parents, but before you knew it, you were isolating yourself from your parents. And if you're somebody who values that relationship, that's another effect or impact of you doing something that you shouldn't have been doing. Because now you're feeling like, well, I'm going to lie because they don't want me to do this, so I'm not going to tell them. gonna hide it from them. And so that's another effect, that a lot of kids are very emotionally mature, even when they don't showcase it. They have feelings, they have thoughts, they may not always share them, but they're there, right? And so if you pose to them, hey, well, you know, you're lying to me, or we're not as close as we used to be because you're doing this thing, and I'd really just like to have our relationship back, you know, that's a thing that they could value as well. And then I'm gonna rewind. She mentioned earlier, she touched briefly on the evidence-based program that was there back in the day. So, so I think a lot of people remember DARE as being a scare tactic type of program, right? Well, I went through DARE, and what I remember was this resource officer that I knew from my community coming to the school all the time, and I won a teddy bear. And so I remembered the community aspect of it. I remembered that we were seeing officers in schools more often, and it wasn't for bad situations. They weren't showing up because someone was in trouble or it was time to arrest someone. They were showing up to have conversations with us about some things that were happening in our community. And so by the time I saw anyone drugged out, or by the time I saw someone getting high, I was kind of turning up my nose, because I was like, so lame. Like, why are you doing that? Like, you can't even get your grades right. You out here doing drugs, like different things like that, right? And so it all goes together. You have to have the balance of telling the truth, but the whole truth. Like, we can't sugarcoat it and say, yes, it's going to be fun, without saying, well, but this is also going to be the impact of it. But because of how the kids are today, you can't just jump to, you're going to die, right? So a little scary mixed with, you know, hey, but the truth of the matter is, at first, it's going to be fine. And before you know it, you end up on a slippery slope. So I think everyone is making super valid points, and it's needed, right? We have to have real conversations with them, because by the time you jump to something, they're like, well, first of all, you don't take me seriously as the adult that I am at 12. So I can't have a serious conversation with you because you're treating me as a child. And in their mind, they're not children. In their mind, they think that they're adults, but it just leans to them wanting to be spoken to as if they are intelligent beings, because they are.
Oh, yeah.
That was impressive, by the way. So I just wanted to piggyback off of what this young lady just said as well. My name is Shantir Lazar. I work with Juvenile Drug Court for Empower in Seminole County. One of the things that we just incorporated was our parent support groups, so that our parents are able to take off the blinders and they're able to see the type of like signs that are there without the kids saying too much. Because one of the things that I value, but I really want our parents to get involved in, is our kids are very comfortable talking to us, but yet they don't go home with us, right? So a lot of the things that we try to get the parents to understand and see, like putting away your medication and making sure that it's not in reach, because kids are curious. And a lot of those parents will think, well, my child doesn't use drugs. Nobody in our house uses drugs, but you're not the only identifying factor that kid sees. So one of the things that I will say I'm super proud of for our program is that we partner with DJJ and we do our parent support groups, so that they see, like, okay, your kid is also getting influence from this place, not just you. And it's been very, very beneficial for us. So.
Any other comments right now?
My name is Victoria Diaz. I'm a community liaison for New Season Treatment Centers. We provide outpatient treatment for adults, but every day, every week, we get the question, well, my kid, my child, do you guys help them? And unfortunately, we don't. But I guess this is probably more of a question for the room, but what is that one piece of advice you can give that you just have in your pocket when that parent asks you, hey, I just found out my kid's addicted to fentanyl. What do I do? I've had that question probably 3 times in the last month, and it's just, there's so many things you want to say. There's so much information you want to give them, right? But you only have so much you can in that moment. So for you guys, for anybody, what is that piece of information you pull out of your pocket in that moment when they say, hey, I just found out my kid is addicted to fentanyl. What do I do?
Okay. Sorry.
One of the things that I would definitely suggest is having that natural or that resource to Narcan, right? When we talk about fentanyl, we talk about opiate or stimulants and all type of things. That kind of is a conversation that most people do not like to have, is the information about Narcan, how to use it, where to access it. So as a substance abuse therapist, that's one of the things that I always like to connect my parents to resources with. We keep Narcan on campus because sometimes we never know. So when those parents do reach out, that's one thing that I always have access to is Narcan, MAT treatment, so, just different things like that to where it could possibly be available in their area.
I would say as a treatment provider, if you're only providing services to adults, partner with a program that provides services to adolescents, so you have that whole wraparound, right? Because now you have a mother or father that found out their child is now using fentanyl, cocaine, whatever it may be. Even it could just be marijuana. I've had clients like that myself, and it goes back to, yes, we want to help the adolescent, but then now we're putting the parents, the parents' sobriety at risk as well. So just having that wraparound service as a treatment provider, partner with somebody that provides treatment to adolescents as well.
Dustin, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I do think that we are in a place now where we can start prescribing, I'm going to say this not as a doctor, as a social worker, that we should be prescribing Suboxone to youth. We've got 17-year-olds that come through our programs that we prescribe to. It's not ideal. We don't want to be in this position, but if the choice is a youth using fentanyl or youth using Suboxone, we've got a doctor connected to them. We've got a nurse that's sitting at front desk. We've got family involvement, so we want to do anything we can to connect them with treatment. I completely agree that linking up with a children's program is a great avenue as well. Going back to the Narcan statement, Dr. Solomon shared a map earlier, and that whole map should be black. Everybody should have Narcan, if not in your office, in your home, if not in your home, your neighbor's home. You should have it. That whole map should be covered with just an abundance of Narcan throughout the state. There's no reason at this point. So please get Narcan in your agency.
Dr. Stavros, can you address the prescription to block violence for a 17-year-old?
So as in the laws, you mean?
No, and the protocol.
Yeah, so opioid use disorder obviously does not start at age 18. For years, and I'm not an expert in pediatric addiction medicine, but I will tell you the mainstay of treatment has been not using medications for the most part. It's not been allowed to use medications. In methadone clinics, you can't be under 18. And so obviously we're seeing a huge amount of overdose deaths, even in our youth. And so that has changed over the last several years. As a matter of fact, 42 CFR just had some new changes. It says, listen, we've been withholding methadone treatment for these younger folks because we didn't think that was the way we needed to go, or we didn't want to make them dependent on something else. But really the stats show that if we withhold that, they're overdosing and dying. We're having better outcomes if we can get them engaged, whether that's on Suboxone or methadone. It may not be a long-term type of treatment, but getting them on something that's obviously safer, and they're not overdosing and dying when they're within that program. So they've relaxed those rules a little bit. Really, medication-assisted treatment is the standard of care for opioid use disorder, whatever your age is, right? You've got to address it initially. It is a comprehensive care that you want to do. It's not just medication alone. It's, like she had said, medication-assisted treatment, right? It's assisting the treatment that we give, just like we do with diabetes. Diabetes is medication-assisted treatment, right? I don't say, here's your insulin, eat all your donuts you want. No, we're going to also give education how to do behavioral change too. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. So I would like to know some best practices for navigating pushback with school boards when it comes to talking about the importance of Narcan distribution in the schools for one thing, but also the fact that kids are vaping in the buses, they're vaping in the bathrooms,
often those vapes are laced with fentanyl, and yet our school board in Volusia County is still pushing back. But we've been trying to get Narcan in the buses for several months. We had a big battle getting the resource officers trained and giving them Narcan, which we finally won that piece. But we're still getting pushback in general for prevention programs sometimes in the schools. It's just been very difficult to navigate because apparently they're afraid, that if you talk about it, you're going to do it more, which we know that that's not true. So I would love to hear some best practices regarding that topic. Thank you.
Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Anybody out in the crowd?
Yeah.
So this is a very tough one. I think when it comes to making any change, it's about who you know and who is going to influence the school board. They aren't listening to me in Northwest Florida. They aren't listening to Dr. Stavros. They're not listening to our peers in the medical field. But they do listen to clergy a little bit more than they do us. They do listen to the PTA. They do listen to those groups. So if you can infiltrate those groups and get them on board and finding the right connections, you may have a little bit more influence and power on the school board. But it's a problem that we're having just as much.
But they also listen to the legal system, right? I mean, you have, could you imagine saying, so you knew my kid had an opioid problem and you refused to allow Narcan here and now my kid's dead? Buddy, you're done. I mean, that's it. I'm sorry. So that sometimes it takes that. Unfortunately, I'd hate to see that happen, but that's part of the issue when we're trying to make change. They have to understand that it's going to affect them, their reputation, financial, whatever the case might be. Sometimes that has a lot of impact too. So.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Bliska. I work at the Hernando Community Coalition, and I'm part of the coalition there. And I'm a project director there that works with the youth. I just want to comment on your question. We had a very similar situation in Hernando County, but there was a passing of a student. So next thing you know, we got a phone call at our coalition to please come out and supply some Narcan to all the staff, all the student resource officers. But I think a lot of it was prior to that was us boots on the ground, going out, doing presentation after presentation after presentation, and really networking in the community with any key partners, any stakeholders, whether it's legal, whether it's community agencies, just to have them come to the table. So I don't know if you're part of a local coalition or if there's one in your area, but just getting out and partnering. Before you know it, I was presenting at PTA's SAC committee meetings, that type of thing. But it did take us a little while, but it's that perseverance. And of course, unfortunately, something had to happen to a student, but we were able to go out and meet that need. So perseverance.
That's a great point. If they're not listening to you, just keep going. Just keep going. Believe in what you're doing here. Give that, that information to those folks. So when, unfortunately, if something does happen, you know what? They know where to go. I know exactly who to call because I've heard this for the last 2 years and I haven't listened. Now I know exactly who to call. But
I think the issue might also be a little bit of the stigma surrounding the fact that there is drug use in schools. I think no one really wants to admit that that's a problem. And so maybe a little upstream of them saying no is maybe doing something to combat the stigma associated with that there are kids doing drugs in your school. I'm not quite sure the best way to get that done, but I'm sure there are a lot of big brains in this room. We can figure something out. But I think that's the biggest piece of it. No one wants to admit that they have an issue like that. And so why would I prepare for an issue I don't have?
Go.
Okay, I'm just going to say one more thing. We also have a student leadership program called Impact for middle school and high school students. So we utilize them as well to go out and start talking about the issues that are going on in their schools and use them as a voice when our voice gets kind of convoluted or, kind of in the background, especially as an older adult now. But you bring them to the forefront. They talk to not only other kids, but they come with us to the school board meetings. They come with us to Board of County Commission meetings to speak about what is also going on. And we have about 200 kids in that right now. So it's really a positive influence with that. So getting the kids on board and being able to use their voice as well.
Don't take the mess. How much you get?
Well, I know I'm pretty proud of that actually, but it's a work in progress. You go into school, it's all about partnerships and working with the schools, even on the lower level. I have good relationships with principals or even school social workers or, whoever I can find really who will listen to me, basically. And then you make that partnership, and then we're able to form some groups, and I have teachers on board. We do it through different grants that we have at our coalition to be able to offset this, but then we do it through each of the schools.
Have you utilized any social media platforms at all?
Absolutely. And again, that's where the kids come into play, because I'm on Facebook. That's pretty much it, right? So they come in and they tell me what is a good way. And then we also do what's called social norming, which is pretty much getting out different campaigns out there in front of these kids, and who better to ask about these campaigns except them. So we do some focus groups. What do you think is going to work in this school? So we get a core group in the middle school, and then they in turn work with some of the other clubs, what's a beta club, government, whatever goes on, and come together and say, hey, what's that going to look like here? And then we put that together. And then that's our job as a coalition to kind of, I call it, I'm the funding lady, right? So I go back to my executive director and say, hey, this is what's going on. What kind of monies do we have to work with to put this together? And then they go and then put that out, and then whether it's plastering posters or, what can you do? But besides the posters, then they do activities surrounding that, right? So that message truly gets out, and they're not just staring also at a poster. So it's kind of a 2 or 3-fold process.
Great.
So one of the things that I wanted to say was Dr. Stavros touched it about money. This is always one of if somebody's coming at you litigiously, that is a huge factor in getting something done. And so there is some case law, and it talks about warm handoffs, but there was a gentleman that died at a hospital who repeatedly went for overdoses. Over and over again, no medication was ever offered to him for treatment, and he died, and his family sued and won. But this is something to look at, because if we have a child that dies and we're not offering any kind of naloxone or even education, then who's liable? And that's something to look at, because we just have to keep talking. And when I started working with medication-assisted treatment, I had a lot to learn, because I absolutely hated it. I absolutely hated it to begin with. My brother died in his addiction, and he was on methadone. And one of the things that has really made a difference for me in working in this field now is understanding the connections that have to happen. So the warm handoffs, the peers, all of those things come into play, and that's something that we have to look at this as a community, literally. I work with core networks, so one of the things that we're trying to get across is that we have to come together as a community, utilizing all of our resources, not just some, not just the preferred, but all of our resources to combat this problem. And that's something that we have to do, come together as a community. But I worked with the mayor in a small town in Georgia, and I can do this because I'm from Georgia, so just telling you. So he came to me and he was like, well, I don't rightly think we got us a problem with no opioids, Miss Williams. And I said, well, I rightly think we do. So, and this is something that we have to come to, and eventually
I was called into his office for him to tell me a secret, to whisper to me about his neighbor that was using opioids. That was a win. I don't care if he whispered. That was a win because that work that we put into educating the community, it came through fruition and we had a program.
So we battled a lot with the schools. I guess we kind of got lucky. Every school system's a little bit different. We had chief of police who was the chief over the school board resource officers. It was different from the sheriff's department. Happened to know him, called him, said, hey, can we get in? Got us in with teaching the school bus drivers. Got all the school bus drivers, left every school bus driver with 2 kits. From there, it led into school board nurses. Let's get all the nurses, make sure everybody's trained up, leave them with Narcan. Then we got the school resource officers, since we had that same connection. Then it came to a screeching halt, the politics involved in it, and the superintendents of schools, not wanting it in there. So a good way of doing it is trying to find statistics in the state and the counties around you, seeing how many calls people responded to, how many overdoses have happened in schools, and present them with that information. We had gone to a call the previous year. 5 kids had all gotten a hold of gummies. Somebody had gotten online, checked a box, yes, they're over 18, which is really hard to do, and got a bag of gummies sent to their house, took them to school, started handing them out to everybody. We ended up in there at one time for 5 kids, and obviously none of them were overdoses, or overdosed, I should say. But the situation is that could have been fentanyl. It could have been oxy. It could have been anything else. And when you start providing information like that to the schools, they're going to start listening. Luckily, we kind of backdoored the system by knowing the police chief, so that worked for us. But like you say, once we got there, we got the school board nurses, and it stopped. We're like, Murphy's Law states that when this happens, it's not going to happen to one kid. It's going to happen to multiples at one time. School board nurse is going to be overwhelmed with 1 or 2 patients. So we asked for additional people in the schools, said, hey, can we come in there, teach 5, 10, how many ever other teachers want to know this? And it was no. It was a dead fast no. It took us a year of beating on their door, of basically going, I understand this is a form of politics for you, and you're going to get ridicule over having Narcan in the school, but nobody's going to know it's in the school unless you need to use it. And then you're going to be like, we saved a life. So which way do you want to go with that interaction in social media of, hey, yes, we had it, we saved a life, or no, we didn't have it, and we could have saved a life. So sometimes it's about the approach, but getting stats of overdoses, of instances where just drugs were used in schools, and handing that information over to them is going to be a huge push and getting you in there. We all know what happens. There is a high school that I know of that their nickname is the pharmacy. So, when you start telling people that and they're like, what? And you're like, yeah, and it's in your backyard. So just get the information, get it together, and just don't quit pushing on the schools.
I think we still have 10 more minutes. Any other questions, comments?
Yes, Donna. Thank you so much.
I have a question from way earlier, but I didn't want to stop the flow. Someone mentioned, it might have been one of you, someone mentioned stimulant use. It might have been you. I'm not sure. It was stimulant use among students, including college students and students that, students that get it from their friends. It's not their prescription, all that jazz, right? Is there anything that we're doing, or is there anything we can do that kind of targets that need to be successful and to be high achieving? I think that a lot of the conversation around that goes to kids having to pull all-nighters, or they're getting sleepy in the middle of the day. They don't realize they probably have ADHD or something. But they're getting other people's medication. There are other issues there, but they're thinking, well, I need to stay up for this exam, or I'm not doing well in this class, so I need something extra to help me. And this is the quick fix versus the true therapy or resources that they need. So is there anything that we're kind of talking about doing, any type of strategies for kind of reducing that stigma of you have to be the best at everything. You have to make sure you're high achieving, whatever it is that drives them to,
to succeed. Yeah. All right, to the panel. Yeah.
Whew. I think it goes back to, when we're talking about social media, right? I said earlier that, we don't know the story behind the picture, right? And I think we have to reinforce our youth to do the best they can do, right? Not the best he can do or she can do. It's what they can do. And, stop with the peer pressure, the parental pressure, the teacher pressure. Just letting them know that what they're doing is enough. It's not a best practice, right? It's not a fix it, but also, helping them understand that there is not a magic pill for everything. There really isn't. And what they do is enough. I think positive reinforcement goes a long way.
And then we've got education again. I think that the more that we can educate and the more that we can reduce the stigma, the more likely it is that we get the right outcome. So if we can take the parent groups that we have and we can educate on when your child is prescribed a medication, do some counts frequently, right? Check on your own kids' medications because they may be sharing it, right? There's a market for it. And when kids can get $3 or $5 or $10 or $20 for a pill, why wouldn't they, right? There's no steady income for a child. And then if you say, well, here you go, here's $5, why wouldn't they do that? So educate them, but only educate the parents as well and say, here's the benefit of you counting these medications is that for the same reason of when your kid shares that medication and that kid gets in trouble, it comes back on you, right? Because they're going to immediately go, well, I got it from so-and-so's kid. And you don't want to be in that position. So educate the parents. I think that when it comes to the desire to achieve all the time, it's a cultural thing that we all do, right? I think that we do that in our office, we do that in sports, we do that in school, and that's a much broader question than I think that we can solve with stimulants or not using stimulants. But educating in that. Reducing that stigma wherever we can is always going to be the best avenue.
Yeah, I love this discussion. So it's a great question because people are striving to do the best that they can do, but sometimes the best that they can do may not be good enough to achieve their goals, and so I just need a little extra edge or something. So I think Taylor, you had mentioned being open and honest. Like just have that discussion. If you can have that discussion with your kid, explaining like, yep, you know what, you might feel good. It might give you a little edge right now, but there's another side to this thing. And there's also to the point is, there's undiagnosed ADHD out there and there's overdiagnosed ADHD. But so, I think it's really important that if you think your child might have ADHD, like get them to a legitimate psychiatrist that is doing the right practice to see if that is something that they would qualify for or be indicated for medications. There's a lot of newer medications out there that are safer also. And I think that's important, not just to go to any Joe Blow doctor, believe it or not, they'll write a script sometimes. Some folks will just to make you happy and off you go. And so I hate to say that, but that is actually a true statement. So, Carrie.
But even to take it back to the pen in the prescription or the click on the computer, where that person, are they filling out self-screening tools? Where is the testing? Not that you have to have neuropsychological testing to make that diagnosis of ADHD because it's a clinical diagnosis, but that testing would support the necessity of that circuit in the brain being affected and them using that medicine. And then that's informed consent.
Yep. I'm a little bit curious if anyone has made the argument or heard the argument that educating the proper use of Narcan, which can be life-saving, is equated to knowing CPR. in high school, most every teen needs to learn how to know what to do during CPR, right? So I would make the argument that using Narcan is akin to using an EpiPen for someone who has a peanut allergy, right? So even if parents are able to equip their children with life-saving skills, I think that may be an area that maybe at a PTA meeting or something like this, speaking to the schools, that might be an opportunity to show them that we can break down the stigma and just save someone's life.
And just to build off of that, I mean, many of us are treatment providers or, work with youth in various locations. A lot of us in this room are also parents. And so this can, even when we're not yet able to get Narcan in a lot of places in the public, teach your children. My oldest just went off to college 2 weeks ago. They went with Narcan. I made sure I did a training with both of my kids on how to use it. And that's another place we can target stigma. Absolutely. It's a low-hanging fruit. It's an easy place to start. It's not the only place. We have much further to go, but it's something you can do today.
Well, thank you all. We're just about ready for our break following this session. Does anybody have any final comments or questions before we wrap this session up? All right. If not, thank you to our panelists this time. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back at right at 1:30. So thank you all. Thank you for your participation, too.